Tintin is one of the most beloved comic book characters of all time. He's appeared in countless comics, films, TV shows, and radio plays. But did you know his creator held a dark secret? Today, we're exploring the fascinating backstory of Tintin's creator, Herge, his propensity for creating racist imagery, and how he was arrested for being a Nazi collaborator. But before we dig in, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know what other stories you'd like to hear about. Okay, let's get into Tintin. Georges Prosper Remy was born on May 22, 1907, in Etterbeek, Belgium. He was born into a lower middle-class family. His father, Alexis Remy, worked in a bakery. His mother, Elizabeth Dufour, was a housewife. Growing up, Remy fell in love with the animation of famed cartoonist Winsor McCay. He was specifically taken with the Gertie the Dinosaur cartoons, which inspired him to take up drawing. As a boy, Remy would draw simple cartoons and comics in the margins of his school notebooks. At 12, Remy joined the Boy Scouts. He was quickly promoted to troop leader of the Squirrel Patrol, gaining the nickname Curious Fox for his inquisitive nature. The Boy Scouts was a positive experience for the young Remy, who found that his scout leader was an encouraging influence toward his fledgling artistic efforts, even going so far as to publish a drawing Remy had made in their Never Enough newsletter. This was his first published work. It was during this time, creating illustrations and woodcuts for Boy Scout magazines, that Remy would land on his now iconic pseudonym. Initially trying out Jeremy and Jeremiad, Remy finally settled on Herge, a name inspired by the French pronunciation of RG, his reversed initials. Herge's earliest successes came from The Extraordinary Adventures of Totor, a proto-Tintin-style character who was, you guessed it, a Boy Scout. Herge would eventually reboot this character for the Catholic newspaper called Le Petit Vingtième, or the Little 20th, a children's offshoot of Le 20e siècle, aka the 20th century. Saying that the 20th century was a conservative newspaper is a bit of an understatement. Kind of like saying that when the Nazis invaded Poland, they were just going on an enthusiastic vacation. Some consider the paper to be a pro-fascist publication. It would often publish pieces that voiced anti-Semitic points of view and racist imagery. Not really the ideal publication for your kids' comics, but art and commerce are built off of compromise. So basically, Herge made a choice. After working on a few strips with other writers, Herge became dissatisfied in the collaborative aspect of the job and decided to create his own character. This character would be Tintin, a Belgian boy reporter who solves crimes and has adventures in far-off lands. While working at the Little 20th, Herge became close to Norbert Wallet, one of the Catholic priests that worked at the paper. Wallet became something of a mentor to the young Herge, filling the void that was never quite filled by Herge's biological father. He taught Herge about life, encouraged his faith, and stoked some of his darker impulses. Prior to this, Herge was apolitical. However, under Wallet's influence, he began to grow further and further to the right. At the same time, Tintin became something of an overnight success. The antics of the boy adventurer captured the imaginations of young and old alike. The strip was serialized every Thursday in the newspaper. These were later compiled into oversized collections by the much-famed publisher Casterman. As an added tidbit, the French refer to comics as bande dessinée, or BD for short, which literally translates to drawn strips. The initial two Tintin adventures were Tintin in the Land of the Soviets and Tintin in Africa. These comics are filled with offensive and racist imagery, so much so that the collections that are still circulating to this day don't include them. Tintin in Africa, or Tintin in the Congo as it was originally released, features offensive caricatures and stereotypes, and racial bias. During this time, Herge would meet his first wife, Germaine Kikens. Germaine was Wallet's secretary. Herge would parlay these successes into creating a few other strips like Tintin in America and Tintin in the Orient, which would later be renamed Cigars of the Pharaoh. Tintin in America was very well received by the reader base. Tintin travels to America, gets caught up in a plot, and then has to fend off Native Americans and cowboys, survive a train heist, and mix it up with the mob. By this point, Tintin was a money-making machine. So much so that when Herge announced he was going to be doing a book set in China as his next project, it made international news. The world was smaller in 1935. However, everybody wasn't exactly thrilled by the idea of Herge tackling China. Father Gosset, a Catholic priest who was living and working as the chaplain of Chinese students at the University of Leuven, wrote to Herge and encouraged him to, actually do research about China. It was around this time that Norbert Wallet was removed from church and given a position overseeing the preservation of the ruins of Ulm Abbey. This news hit Herge hard. He loved Wallet, and the fact that he was being taken out of Herge's day-to-day life seemed to be a direct affront. Herge was pissed and even tried to quit the paper in protest. But they paid him some more money and loosened his deadlines, and he ended up staying. Eventually, Herge was open to the idea of taking on a bit more research for his next project. Father Gosset provided an introduction to Zhang, an art student at the Brussels Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts. This would set in motion a key and defining era for Herge. Zhang would prove to be a lifelong friend and positive influence. Zhang would go on to become a sculptor of much acclaim and later an art teacher. He and Herge would become fast friends. Zhang's influence on the Tintin strips was immeasurable, catapulting Herge's technical facilities. Herge learned three-point perspective from him, drawing from life, and the practice of taking reference photos. Zhang also introduced Herge to Taoist philosophy, many Chinese illustrators and artists, and the practice of calligraphy. The two men's friendship blossomed, many historians arguing that this one relationship fundamentally altered Herge's view for the rest of his life. The book Herge worked on with Zhang was titled The Blue Lotus. It dealt with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, a highly taboo subject at the time. The lead up to the Second World War created an environment where everything was extremely polarized. And as such, the fact that Japan had invaded China in 1931 and would eventually set up a puppet country named Manchukuo was a hot-button issue. If you're wondering, Manchukuo doesn't exist today. It would exist until the Soviet Union and Mongolia overtook the province in 1945. The Blue Lotus was received with overwhelming positive reviews. It has since gone on to be viewed as Herge's first masterpiece. During the lead-up to World War II, Herge worked on a few more volumes of Tintin, including The Broken Ear and The Black Island. However, these strips are largely ambitionless and rote exercises in narrative. Zhang moved back to China after graduating, the tensions surrounding politics were rising, and without someone to push him artistically, Herge rested on his laurels. And here's where the proverbial merde hits the fan. Belgium got invaded by the Nazis. So in order to attempt to escape the conflict, Herge and his wife fled to France. This was a common plan for Belgians of the time, as tens of thousands did the same. Herge originally found refuge in Paris before moving to Puy-de-Dôme. They lived there for 6 weeks. However, on May 28, 1940, the Belgian king, Leopold III, surrendered in an attempt to stop the bloodshed. Herge and many Belgians were in support of this development, so when the king put out a call to all the refugees to return home, they did. Upon returning home, Herge discovered that his home was being used as an impromptu home for a Nazi officer. It's like a fascist version of the Three Bears. To make things even worse, the Nazis shut down the paper that had been publishing Tintin comics. Herge had his back against the wall. He needed to make money in order to survive, and also because he owed tax money to the Belgian government. He was offered a job at Le Péril, another far-right newspaper published by yet another Catholic-affiliated entity, the Rexist Party. The party's leader, Léon Degrelle, was a longtime friend of Herge's. The two knew each other because Degrelle was a former reporter. To make things even weirder, some people have suggested that Tintin was even based loosely on Degrelle. Nazis, man, they're everywhere. There are conflicting reports about if Herge outright turned this offer down. Then along came Le Soir, the largest francophone newspaper of the day. Tintin was to be rebooted by Herge for Le Soir in a brand new adventure story, Crab with the Golden Claws. Roughly 600,000 people read the strip during this time. And then the inevitable happened. The Nazis, who were in control of Belgium and eventually France, seized control of Le Soir. Here's where things get gray. Herge was attempting to be better and not work for these papers, but he was enticed by the financial rewards that came from the large readership. In the next Tintin adventure, which was entirely produced under Nazi supervision, Tintin would go up against a rich Jewish-American businessman.
We're going to be rich!
Later in life, Herge would say that no ill intention was behind the drawing. It was here that Herge would begin overseeing colorized reprints of his previous works and collaborating with the artist Edgar P. Jacobs and Alice Devos to aid him in coloring and generating the art for the new volumes. This is often looked back on as the highest point that Tintin ever reached, which was under Nazi supervision. Herge would soon go on to create Secret of the Unicorn, Red Rackham's Treasure, and The Seven Crystal Balls. This trilogy of books is often referred to as the best work that Herge ever produced and his second masterpiece. And as is the case with most good things in life, as soon as it got great, it all came crashing down. The Allied forces liberated Brussels, and Le Soir was shut down on September 2, 1944. The next day, Herge was arrested after being named in a document known as the Gallery of Traitors. The Allied forces seized control of Le Soir and fired all the journalists. They were legally barred from practicing their craft again. The criticism surrounding Herge's decisions was such a part of the Belgian conversation that a high-profile resistance newspaper named La Patrie made a parody comic called Adventures of Tintin in the Land of the Nazis. The ire and vitriol aimed at Nazi collaborators during this time was at a fever pitch. Over 5,500 people were sentenced to life imprisonment for how they'd acted during the occupation. Some military courts handed out as much as 30,000 charges in minor violations and 25,000 in serious violations. Raymond Leblanc, a former conservative resistance member, approached Herge in October of 1945 about consulting on a new magazine for children that would feature comics. He was interested, but barred from working due to his collaborator status. Leblanc approached Walter Jean Ganshoff van der Meersch, the head of the military tribunal that was trying cases against Nazis and their supporters. He looked into Herge's case file and decreed that, in regards to the particularly inoffensive character of the drawings published by Remy, bringing him before a war tribunal would be inappropriate and risky. The leniency that was afforded to Herge did not extend to his co-workers at Le Soir. 6 of the journalists that worked there were sentenced to death, and others were convicted of lengthy prison sentences. From here, Herge was able to leave these aspects of his past behind him and successfully propelled himself to being a globally recognized cartoonist. He launched Tintin magazine, published 24 volumes of Tintin, and licensed the character to appear on merchandise and films and on TV shows. So what do you think? Did Herge deserve to be allowed back in the world of comics? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out our other comic history videos on our sister channel, Total Nerd.